really great to have you here in the Tokyo studio. So what's the basis for this strength when it comes to the Japanese financial sector?
Thank you so much. So the Japanese financials have several tailwinds for the rest of this fiscal year. I actually want to mention 5 of them. So one is that the rates are rising. The impact of not only the previous year's rate hike, but also the June rate hike we had, as well as potential for upcoming hikes. Secondly, loans are growing. Just loans are on a tear this year. The BOJ data for April-June loan growth is up 8% year on year for the major banks and 6% overall. As well, you have capital markets activity, which is also accelerating. As well, TOPIX is higher and dollar yen is higher. So this should all be positive for Japanese banks' earnings.
What are your expectations for BOJ decision this Friday?
This Friday, we think they are on hold. However, a lot of focus is on the outlook report to see what their view is on the current inflation, as well as overall global economy, for any signs of any potential rate hikes in the future.
How much of the strength that we're seeing in Japanese banks, I mean, you listed a few of them, but how much is it to do with higher rates versus the strength of the capital markets? Is this quantifiable at some point?
Sure. It's really both. And it's quite amazing how everything is converging together at this moment. So if you look at the mega banks, about a quarter of the net revenue would come from interest rate related. And so there's definitely tailwind from rates there. But also, I mean, loan growth and capital markets. You look at third-party data, DCM is up year on year. Equity capital markets is up something like 40% year on year on a calendar year basis. It's quite amazing. So, it's actually a no-brainer, I think, for me to forecast higher earnings for Japanese banks.
An easy call for the Japanese financial sector. What about when it comes to the broader Japanese economy, especially when we're seeing this loan growth? Does that tell us anything specific about the strength of this economy?
Sure. And I think you have only to look at the Tankan survey in June, where companies not only had a positive DI, but also expectation for CAPEX investment. And this is part of what's really driving the loan growth right now. You could call it reflation, you could call it capex, but it's everything from system of investment to R&D that's driving that loan growth right now. So I think this is not only a first quarter phenomena, but potentially also longer term.
At what point does a weak Japanese yen become counterproductive in the fact that okay, it will benefit perhaps the big companies, especially the ones that do business overseas, but what about the smaller companies here in Japan, smaller firms, households as well, that could have a bigger impact in the broader economy?
Sure, that's a really good question. And I think, in the near term, if you look at the banks, there's something like a 3% earning upside to a 10 yen depreciation type sensitivity for net income. But of course, longer term, there are imported input costs. And so to the extent that they can pass it through to end users, that's fine.
But and that's the difficulty right now, right? Especially when it comes to, first of all, the cultural thing in Japan of passing it to the end users, to the customers is one thing. At the same time, the risks that the uncertainty over the Middle East pose and what oil prices will do next, given how heavily dependent Japan is on those imports. Does broader uncertainty and lengthened uncertainty when it comes to the Iran war also mean potentially more pressure for Japanese banks to have to deal and have to survive within this economy?
Of course. And that's why we think that on the other side of the 5 tailwinds I mentioned, there's also 2 risks. And one is the Middle East risk prolonged, because this could mean potential risk to supply chains or unexpected rise in input costs. The banks have provisioned last year for this type of risk, but it does remain an uncertainty.
When it comes to what the Japanese government is trying to achieve in this economy, with more funds being pulled back from overseas into Japan, we're talking about pension funds and encouraging them to invest in domestic assets. Does that have any implications for banks?
Not directly, but tangentially it does, because that does potentially influence the 10-year yield level. Now, a higher 10-year JGB yield means the banks can reinvest their JGBs at higher JGB yield. So it is an opportunity, but it does have an upfront cost of realizing unrealized loss on bonds. So what we like to see is maybe gradually higher 10-year GGB yield for the banks. But of course, you know, what we're talking about with potential communication around GGB yield, that does affect that upside and downside.
Do you see that risk with the upcoming BOJ policy decision, more volatility in the JGB space?
Not at the moment, no. You know, 10-year yield is the policy rate and term premia. It's more of a sort of longer-term development. July BOJ, we simply expect confirmation of our policy rate cycle outlook.
Makoto Kuroda, good to have you with us, Japan financials and fintech sector analyst at Goldman Sachs.